The night sky over northern France was alive with thunder. 200 British Lancasters roared through the darkness, engines trembling the air as they headed toward Germany. Among them, a 21-year-old flight officer, Fred Mifflin, held his controls steady, eyes fixed on the instruments glowing faintly in the cockpit. He knew the mission's odds. 1 in 4 crews might never return. But there was no turning back. Far below, the German radar had already found them. Searchlights pierced the clouds. Tracer fire rose like fiery vines reaching for heaven. And somewhere in that black sky, a silent hunter waited. A Bf-110 night fighter, its guns pointing upward. When it fired, another Lancaster exploded into flame. Inside Mifflin's bomber, no one spoke. Only the wind, the engines, and the whisper of prayer filled the air. Steady, lads. We're almost at target. The war had turned the night into hell, and yet for some, it was only the beginning of a story that would defy death itself. The Lancaster shook violently as anti-aircraft shells burst all around it, bright flowers of fire blooming in the blackness. Every explosion felt closer than the last. Inside the cramped fuselage, 7 men fought to stay composed, each one trusting Miff to guide them home. "Hold tight, boys, we're still flying." Miff's voice crackled through the intercom, calm and steady. Behind him, the flight engineer Norman Jackson checked the fuel lines and engine gauges, his hands trembling slightly from the concussion waves outside. He had just become a father a few days earlier. His wife had sent a letter. "Our baby boy is healthy." Jackson hadn't even seen his child yet, but tonight his thoughts were not of home. They were of survival. The target city glowed faintly in the distance, illuminated by the eerie light of signal flares. The bomb aimer took his position. Steady, steady. Bombs away. The Lancaster lurched upward as its payload fell, and a thunderous chain of explosions lit up the ground below. Mission accomplished. Now came the hardest part, getting out alive. Miff turned the heavy bomber toward the west, heading for the safety of the channel. But fate wasn't done with them yet. "We've been hit!" someone shouted. A blast rocked the plane. Flames erupted along the right wing. Fuel was leaking, and one spark could turn the aircraft into a floating coffin. Miff's voice stayed calm. "Don't panic, we're still flying. I'll get us home." But behind that steady voice, every man knew the truth. They were one heartbeat away from disaster. The orange glow outside the window grew brighter with every second. Through the smoke and turbulence, Norman Jackson could see it. Fire spreading fast across the right wing. If the flames reached the fuel tank, the entire aircraft would erupt in a single, blinding explosion. "Engine 3's on fire!" shouted the navigator. "Feather the propeller!" Miff commanded. The crew scrambled. Oxygen masks swung. Instruments flickered. The smell of burning fuel filled the cabin. Jackson's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to bail out, but Miff's calm voice held them together. "Stay sharp, lads. We're not done yet." Jackson grabbed a small extinguisher, instinctively aiming it toward the smoke seeping in through the fuselage seams, but the fire was too far out, licking at the edge of the wing. He stared at it, realizing the impossible. No extinguisher could reach that far from inside. "We can't put it out from here," shouted one of the gunners. Jackson's mind raced. He was bleeding from shrapnel in his leg, but his thoughts were razor clear. There was only one way to stop that fire. Go out there and do it himself. He looked at Miff. "I'm going out on the wing." "You what?" Miff's disbelief cracked through the intercom. But Jackson didn't hesitate. If the fire reached the tank, they'd all die anyway. He took a deep breath, eyes steady. "I can crawl out through the hatch. You hold my parachute line." The others stared in shock. The wind outside screamed through the gun ports. They were flying at 18,000 feet, freezing air, hurricane-speed winds, and death in every direction. Jackson just whispered to himself, "For them, I have to try." The crew thought he had lost his mind. No one in their right senses would crawl out of a burning bomber at nearly 6 kilometers above enemy territory. But Norman Jackson was no ordinary man. He was a father, a friend, and tonight, a guardian of 7 souls trapped in the sky. He tightened the straps of his parachute, ignoring the pain pulsing through his wounded leg. "Tie me off with the chute line," he told the bomb aimer. The man hesitated, voice shaking. "You can't do this, Norman. It's suicide." "Maybe," Jackson replied. "But if that fire reaches the tank, we're all dead anyway." The wind howled through the open hatch like a beast. The moment the panel came off, freezing air rushed in, stinging every inch of skin. Miff slowed the Lancaster as much as he could, 180 miles per hour. Still deadly fast, but any slower and the plane would stall. Jackson looked once more at the faces of his crew, exhausted, terrified, but alive, and nodded. "Ready?" "Ready." Then he stepped out into the hurricane. The force nearly ripped him from the fuselage. His body flailed violently, the line of his parachute pulling tight against his chest. Using a small escape axe for grip, he dug it into the metal skin of the plane, dragging himself inch by inch toward the burning wing. Below him, the world was nothing but blackness and tracer fire. Above, the stars were silent witnesses. As he reached the edge of the wing, heat burned through his gloves. The flames hissed, alive and furious, roaring toward the fuel tank. Jackson raised the extinguisher with trembling hands and pulled the trigger. White vapor erupted, mixing with fire and smoke, the hiss of survival against the roar of death. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, miraculously, the flames began to fade. Inside the bomber, the crew erupted in disbelief. "He's doing it! He's putting it out!" But just as hope flared, another shadow swept across the moonlit clouds. A German FW-190 had returned. The hunter wasn't finished, and this time, Norman Jackson was completely exposed. The German fighter dove from above, silent, precise, deadly. Its cannons flashed once, twice, the air filled with glowing tracers tearing through the night. Jackson heard the impact before he felt it. Bullets ripped through the fuselage, one striking his leg, another his shoulder. He clung to the wing, pain blinding, the extinguisher still hissing weakly as the fire flared again. He tried to lift his arm, but it refused to move. The heat was unbearable. The metal beneath him glowed red, burning through his gloves into his skin. Inside the cockpit, Miff shouted, "He's hit! We've got to pull him in!" But it was too late. A single round pierced the fuel line. The next second, the entire side of the plane erupted in fire. A wall of flame engulfed Norman Jackson. For a heartbeat, he saw nothing, just light, white-hot and endless. And then his body was flung from the wing, spinning violently into the darkness. The crew felt the tug on the parachute line. The sudden tension nearly ripped the bomb aimer's hands apart. "He's gone! We can't hold him!" The line snapped free. Norman Jackson vanished into the abyss, his body trailing fire like a falling star. Below, he tumbled helplessly through the freezing wind. The world turned into streaks of smoke, sparks, and blood. At 10,000 feet, the flames around him died. His body was scorched, his parachute smoldering, but somehow, impossibly, it opened. He fell for what felt like forever. Then, with a brutal crash, he hit the ground. Pain exploded through his body. His ankles shattered, his hands were burned raw, and his lungs filled with smoke. But he was alive. Above him, the Lancaster continued to burn, descending in silence. Norman Jackson looked up, tears mixing with soot, whispering, "Please, let them make it." He didn't know it yet, but his act of courage had already become legend. The wreckage of the Lancaster lit up the French countryside as it fell, a fiery scar across the night sky. Jackson lay hidden in the darkness below, his body broken, but his mind clinging to one thought: "I'm still alive." He tried to move, but pain shot through every limb. Both ankles were shattered. His right shoulder hung limp, torn by a bullet. The smell of burnt fabric and skin filled the cold air. Crawling with his elbows, he dragged himself through the mud, inch by inch. Every movement left a trail of blood. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked. German patrols were searching for survivors. He spotted a faint light, a farmhouse. He whispered to himself, "If I can just make it, someone will help." It took him hours to reach it. By the time he arrived at the door, he barely had the strength to knock. The door opened, and he collapsed. The family inside gasped at the sight of the burnt, uniformed figure. They tended to him as best they could before the Germans arrived. Norman Jackson was captured and sent to a POW camp, but by another twist of fate, that camp had a hospital run by Allied doctors. Over months of treatment, he began to heal. When the war ended, he was freed and finally met the son who'd been born the night of his mission. He was later awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest honor for bravery. When told of the award, he only said one thing: "Why me?" Because sometimes surviving the impossible is the greatest act of courage there is. The prison gates closed behind him with a metallic echo that would stay in his mind for years. Norman Jackson, once soaring among the stars, now lay in a cold German infirmary, a man broken but unyielding. His hands were wrapped in thick bandages. His body bore the marks of fire, steel, and faith. The doctors, Allied prisoners themselves, worked tirelessly to save him. They whispered among each other, calling him the man who fell from the sky on fire. To them, Jackson wasn't just a patient, he was proof that courage still existed in a world gone mad. Through long months of slow recovery, he replayed the mission in his mind. The faces of his crew haunted his dreams. Miff, Johnson, all of them. He didn't yet know that Miff had refused to leave his wounded gunner behind and had perished in the crash. That knowledge would come later, quietly breaking what little remained of his heart. When the war ended, the camp's gates opened once again, this time to the light of freedom. Jackson walked, limping but alive, into the morning sun. He was greeted by a young nurse holding a small child. His child. The son he had never met. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he knelt, tears streaming down his scarred face, and whispered, "I came home, little one. I came home." Months later, a telegram arrived. "The king has awarded you the Victoria Cross." He read the words in silence, then smiled faintly. Why me? So many didn't make it home. But history would remember him, the man who crawled into fire to save others. Norman Cyril Jackson, a name forever written among those who cheated death. It was the final desperate month of the war. Germany was collapsing, its cities burning, its armies scattered. But from the ruins rose a final act of madness, a mission born of despair. They called it Sonderkommando Elbe, the Elbe Special Unit. Its purpose was unthinkable, to destroy Allied bombers not with bullets, but with bodies. Young German pilots were ordered to ram enemy aircraft mid-air, sacrificing their lives to stop the relentless tide of B-17s. Among them was Klaus Hahn, barely 20 years old. He had grown up watching Allied bombs fall on his hometown. His mother's house reduced to ashes, his neighbors buried under rubble. The war had taken everything, and now it asked for his life. April 7, 1945, his first and only mission. He climbed into his Messerschmitt Bf-109, patched together from spare parts. No armor, little ammunition, almost no chance of return. Yet he smiled faintly as the ground crew saluted. "Für das Vaterland," he said quietly. "For the fatherland." The radio crackled with static. Dozens of young voices answered the same call. Above them, the sky was filled with thunder. Hundreds of Allied bombers heading east, escorted by silver P-51 Mustangs. To Klaus Hahn, they looked like giants. His heart pounded as he climbed higher, clouds tearing past his canopy. He tightened his grip on the stick, eyes locked on the distant shapes. This was his moment, his chance to strike back, to make the world remember that he existed. And yet, deep inside, a question whispered through the noise. Was this truly courage or desperation? He didn't have time to answer. The radar crackled. The order came through. Attack formation. Engage. Klaus Hahn pushed the throttle forward and dove straight into history. The sun glared across the canopy as Klaus Hahn's Bf-109 screamed toward the horizon. Below him, a formation of B-17 flying fortresses stretched across the sky like a moving city. Hundreds of bombers, silver wings catching the light. Each one carried thousands of pounds of destruction meant for what was left of Germany. Hahn's radio filled with scattered voices, panic, static, and prayers. "I've lost my engine. I'm hit. Going down." He was alone now. The rest of his squadron had been torn apart by American P-51 Mustangs patrolling above. He could see them, sleek, deadly, circling like hawks. A burst of .50 caliber fire ripped past his left wing. The sound was deafening, metal shrieking in pain. He rolled sharply, trying to evade, but his aircraft was sluggish. The Bf-109 he'd been given was barely airworthy. No armor, little ammunition, its engine coughing smoke with every dive. A tracer round punched through the cockpit canopy, grazing his shoulder. He flinched, gripping the stick tighter. The smell of cordite and oil filled his lungs. Another hit. Pain shot through his arm. Sharp, burning. He looked down. Blood. His right arm hung uselessly at his side. "Not now. Please, not now," he whispered. He tried to pull up, but the stick wouldn't move. The fighter rolled onto its back, nose tipping toward the earth. The horizon spun wildly, and then, through a gap in the clouds, he saw them. A full squadron of B-17s directly below, sunlight flashing off their fuselages. The same bombers that had once destroyed his city. Something inside him snapped. He could feel the fury, the grief, the ghosts of his family. "If I must die," he muttered, "then I'll take one of you with me." With his one good hand, Klaus Hahn forced the throttle forward. The engine screamed as he dove. The world narrowed to one target, the tail of a single B-17. He aligned his sights, wind tearing at his face. 3 seconds, 2, 1, impact. A blinding explosion of metal and fire ripped the sky apart. The Bf-109 shattered on contact, tearing through the bomber's tail. Inside the fortress, alarms wailed, controls jammed, men shouted over the roar. Both aircraft began to fall, but neither story was over yet. Smoke filled the cabin of the B-17 flying fortress, and chaos erupted inside. Metal fragments spun through the air like shrapnel rain. The rear turret was gone, ripped clean from the fuselage, and what was left of the tail section flapped wildly in the slipstream. Captain Bud Wentz gripped the controls, eyes burning from smoke. "What happened?" "A fighter hit us, rammed us," the co-pilot shouted. The elevator controls were dead, the rudder gone. The plane should have been falling to pieces, but somehow, impossibly, it was still in the air. "We've lost the tail controls. I can't hold her steady." Wentz fought the yoke with all his strength, but it moved like stone. The only thing keeping the fortress alive was its 4 engines, all still running, roaring defiantly against gravity. He thought fast. If he couldn't steer with the rudder, he'd use thrust. By alternating the engine power between left and right, he could turn. Barely. "Listen to me, boys. We're not bailing out, not yet. We're taking her home." The intercom crackled with disbelief. "Sir, we're missing half the tail." "I know," Wentz said quietly, "but she's still flying." The bomber rolled slightly, smoke trailing from the torn fuselage. Wentz tapped the throttles with precision, easing back one engine, pushing another, and the giant aircraft obeyed, inching westward away from the formation. Red leader, this is Red 4, Wentz radioed, voice trembling. "We've sustained heavy damage. Exiting formation, over." "All right, copy that, Red 4, came the reply. "Godspeed." The B-17 slipped out of formation, gliding like a wounded bird over enemy lines. Inside, silence fell, except for the rhythmic thunder of the engines. The co-pilot stared at him. "How are we still up here?" Wentz smiled faintly. because we're not done yet. But as they descended lower, the realization set in. They had no landing gear, no functioning flaps, no control surfaces. If they wanted to live, they'd need a miracle. And in war, miracles were rare. The sky ahead shimmered in the morning haze as Bud Wentz scanned the ground below for any sign of a landing strip. Nothing. Just patchwork fields, broken roads, and the scars of war. "We can't stay up much longer," the co-pilot warned. "Hydraulic pressure's dropping fast." "We'll find a place," Wentz replied. "We have to." The bomber groaned with every gust of wind. 2 engines sputtered. Oil leaked across the wings like black tears. The remaining crew members watched in silence, hands clutching anything they could hold. Then the navigator's voice broke through the static. "There! Off the nose! Looks like a runway!" Wentz squinted. A flat strip of land stretched across the horizon, lined with broken hangars and burned vehicles. He didn't know if it was friendly or enemy, but it was the only chance they had. "That's it. We're putting her down there." The altimeter ticked down. 1,000 feet. 800. 500. "Prepare for landing. Gear down. Not yet. Wait for my mark." Smoke trailed behind them. The propellers cut the air like blades of thunder. Inside, the crew braced for impact. 200 feet. 100. "Gear down now." With a deep mechanical groan, what remained of the landing gear deployed. One wheel locked. The other hung limp. "We're gonna ground loop," the co-pilot muttered. "Not if I can help it." The ground rushed up to meet them. Wentz eased the throttles, flaring what little control he had left. Then, impact. The wheels slammed into the dirt. The entire aircraft jolted violently, throwing everyone forward. The right wheel collapsed instantly. The left skidded through the mud, spraying debris in every direction. The Fortress plowed down the field, metal grinding, engines screaming. One by one, the propellers tore free and scattered into the grass. Finally, silence. The bomber came to rest, smoke curling from its nose. The crew stared at each other, wide-eyed, alive, every one of them. Wentz exhaled, trembling. "We made it, somehow." They climbed out of the wrecked plane and looked around. Abandoned hangars, empty silence, and then footsteps. From behind a ruined building, a soldier emerged. He raised his rifle, then hesitated. An American flag patch glinted on his sleeve. "You boys picked the wrong place to land," the soldier said. "You're on the front line." Wentz looked around in disbelief. They had landed right between enemy and Allied forces. The line between life and death had never been thinner. The American soldier waved them forward urgently. "You've got to move, fast. The Germans are less than 2 miles out." The crew stumbled out of the smoking fortress, coughing, limping, still in disbelief that they were breathing. Behind them, the plane hissed and crackled as the engines cooled, a steel carcass that had somehow brought them back from the dead. Wentz looked around the desolate airfield. Everything was eerily quiet. No other aircraft, no vehicles, just the faint echo of distant artillery. "What is this place?" he asked. "Used to be a German base," the soldier said. "We pushed them back 2 days ago. They left in a hurry." The navigator's voice trembled. "Captain, look over there." Across the runway stood another B-17. Its silver body was faded, covered with dust, but unmistakable. A flying fortress, abandoned, intact, its wings still glinting faintly under the morning sun. The crew exchanged stunned looks. "Is it ours?" "Looks like it," Wentz muttered. "But what's it doing here?" The soldier shrugged. "KG-200, he said. Special Luftwaffe unit. They used captured Allied bombers for secret ops. This one must have been left behind." Wentz's heart raced. He walked slowly toward the silent plane, running his hand along the wing. The metal was cold, but alive. He turned to his men. "Boys, if this bird still flies, we're taking her home." They worked quickly, checking the fuel tanks, the engines, the controls. Against all odds, everything worked. Even the tanks were full. When the engines roared to life, the sound was like resurrection. The same crew that had crashed minutes earlier now climbed aboard another B-17, one that had once belonged to their enemy. As they taxied down the runway, the soldier shouted over the noise, "You sure about this?" "We've come this far," Wentz yelled back. "Might as well finish the job." The plane lifted off the ground, wheels tucking in, and rose into the sky once more, a stolen angel fleeing the ruins of war. They flew over the craters and battle lines, over fields littered with smoke and silence. No escorts, no formation, just faith and a stubborn will to live. Hours later, as the coast of England appeared in the golden light of sunset, the crew erupted in cheers. They had cheated death twice in the same day. "Red 4 to base," Wentz radioed, voice breaking. "We're home, in one piece, sort of." And somewhere above the clouds, the ghosts of that day watched, smiling. Years passed. The war ended, but the memories never did. Captain Bud Wentz returned home, married his sweetheart, and built a quiet life. He rarely spoke about the war. When people asked, he simply smiled and said, "We had some close calls." Across the ocean, Klaus Hahn lay in a hospital bed in Münster. He had survived the collision, barely. His right arm was gone. His face was marked by fire and glass. When the doctors told him he had lived, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had been ready to die that day, certain he had taken a crew of Americans with him. The guilt followed him for decades. He rebuilt his life slowly, studying engineering, raising a family. But every night, when he closed his eyes, he saw the explosion, the flash, the fire, and the faces of the men he believed he'd killed. 58 years later, in 2003, a historian contacted Bud Wentz to write a book about that collision. Wentz agreed to an interview and asked if the German pilot had ever been identified. The researcher smiled. "He's alive." For the first time, the two names, Wentz and Hahn, were written on the same page. Letters were exchanged, then photos, then phone calls. Two old men, once enemies in the same sky, now bound by the same miracle. When Klaus Hahn learned that every man aboard the B-17 had survived, he broke down in tears. "I thought I had killed them," he whispered. "All these years, I thought their blood was on my hands." Bud Wentz, equally moved, said quietly, "No, Klaus, you didn't take our lives. You gave us one hell of a story to tell." They never met in person, but through those conversations, both found peace. The skies that once separated them now connected them. Two men on opposite sides of history, each proof that even in war, humanity can survive. It was winter over western France, cold and clear, perfect weather for dying. 72 B-17 flying fortresses thundered toward the coast, part of a daylight raid against the German submarine base at Saint-Nazaire, a place so heavily defended that Allied pilots called it Flak City. Inside one of those bombers, nicknamed Krek Plick Boom, the crew prepared for the inevitable. Every man knew that the Luftwaffe would be waiting. Every man knew that today might be his last flight. At the bottom of the fuselage, cramped inside a small glass sphere, sat Sergeant Alan E. McGee, the ball turret gunner. He was 24 years old. His world was a tiny bubble of plexiglass and steel, spinning beneath the bomber like a pendulum between heaven and hell. Through the gun sight, he could see the horizon, the fields below, and suddenly, black puffs of smoke appearing all around them. Flak. "Here it comes, boys!" someone shouted over the intercom. The sky erupted. Each explosion was close enough to rattle the teeth in his jaw. The fortress shuddered as shrapnel tore through its wings and body. "Hold steady!" yelled the pilot, Lieutenant Arthur Adams. "Bomb bay doors open!" The bomb aimer released the payload, and the massive aircraft lurched upward. But before they could turn for home, the nightmare arrived. FW-190 fighters, streaking in from the sun, cut through the formation like blades through paper. Tracer rounds ripped the air. Maggi swung his guns, firing bursts of .50 caliber, but the German fighters were too fast. One passed so close that he could see the pilot's face, pale, focused, merciless. Then the world exploded. A shell tore through the fuselage. The krek-plick boom split apart mid-air, fire blooming in every direction. Maggi's turret jammed. He was trapped. Smoke filled his lungs. The heat was unbearable. Desperate, he hammered at the hatch, trying to crawl free as the bomber spiraled downward in flames. He could hear his crewmates shouting, the wind howling, the sound of metal screaming as it tore itself apart. And then, silence, weightlessness. The turret broke loose. Alan Maggi was falling through the open sky without a parachute. The world had turned upside down. Below him, the earth spun like a blurred painting. Fields, rivers, forests rushing upward in horrifying silence. The only sound was the roar of wind tearing past his ears. Alan Maggi was falling at over 200 miles per hour. No parachute, no hope. Just the blue sky above and the face of death below. His oxygen mask ripped away, the cold biting deep into his lungs. At first, he tried to grab for something, anything, but there was nothing but air. He closed his eyes. God, if this is it, let it be quick. The fall felt endless. The seconds stretched into an eternity. He could see the twisted remains of his bomber spiraling below him, his crewmates scattering through the clouds like broken wings. And then he saw it. A town. Buildings, roofs, streets, rushing up at impossible speed. He braced for the end, but fate had other plans. Maggi crashed through the glass roof of a train station in the French town of Saint-Nazaire. The impact shattered every window and broke his fall. He crashed through girders and beams, landing unconscious on the station floor. When rescuers found him, he was barely breathing. Both arms and legs were broken, his ribs shattered, his right eye swollen shut. And yet, he was alive. The German soldiers who pulled him from the wreckage couldn't believe it. They carried him to a military hospital, murmuring, lebt! Lebt! He's alive!" Alan Maggi later woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by nurses and guards. When they told him what had happened, he could only whisper, "I went through the roof?" "Yes," one of them smiled faintly. "And somehow the roof didn't kill you. It saved you." He spent the rest of the war as a prisoner, slowly healing. After liberation, he returned home, not as a legend, but as a man who had fallen 4 miles without a parachute and lived to tell the story. Alan E. Maggi would later say, "I have no explanation for why I survived that fall, except that someone up there caught me." And with that, the skies of war, once filled with fire, fury, and death, had witnessed yet another miracle. 3 men, 3 moments, 3 miracles. Each one had stared death in the face and lived.